Hello everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode of G27TV. My name is Eric Paitko, and I'm the music director and conductor of Group of 27 Chamber Orchestra. I'm going to begin every episode of G27TV with a music trivia question, and at the end of the episode, I'll reveal the answer. Today's question is, who was the only eminent composer in history who's also a successful farmer? For those of you who don't know who we are, Group of 27 is a Toronto-based full chamber orchestra that has an orchestral concert series, a new recital series called G2-7, Get to Know Your G27, and an outreach student program or performance program with the Regent Park School of Music and Dixon Hall Music School. All of the details for our concerts and all of our programs can be seen at our website at groupof27.com. We're now going to take a short commercial break, but when we come back, we'll be talking with Mike Fedishin, G27's principal trumpet player, and I'll also be diving into the music of English composer Gerald Finzi and how his work relates to English food. And of course, I'll be revealing the answer to today's trivia question. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Have you ever had the feeling of despair, of wondering how you can get the beautiful voice writing of the past on the same CD as some beautiful voice writing of today? Well, you're not alone, but don't despair. Your friends at Group of 27 have finally come up with a solution, and it's called their latest CD. Yes, you heard correctly. G27 has released a CD with stunning writing of the past, Berlioz's Les Nuits d'été, with a nuanced and gorgeous writing of today, Nora Pellé's haunting, the poet, and the war song cycle. Hear Canadian soprano Shannon Mercer's expressive voice soar as she and Group of 27 explore these important works. As Toronto critic John Giroux says, Mercer shapes long, arching melodies with the unforced ease of someone sipping their second Long Island iced tea. This is a pool of song one wants to swim around in for hours. Well, John, I'll certainly drink to that. So you can finally stop worrying of where to find the old and new together and purchase what the same critic says is a fantastic debut album by one of Toronto's classical treasures, soprano Shannon Mercer, teaming up with one of the city's greatest secrets, Group of 27 Chamber Orchestra. Get your copy today at groupof27.com/CD.
Warning. May cause some people to finally fall in love with modern music. May cause some people to explore other Berlioz works other than his Symphonie Fantastique.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to G27 TV. Our guest today is Mike Fedishin, right here. He is the principal trumpet player of Group of 27, as well as principal trumpet of Hamilton Phil, and plays regularly with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, National Arts Centre Orchestra in Ottawa, COC, and many other orchestras as well. He's a man about town. We're joining him here in his studio, in his home or backyard in the Annex in Toronto. And hello, Mike.
Hi, Eric.
How are you doing?
I'm well.
Good. Tell us a bit about yourself.
A bit about myself. I started playing the trumpet as a young lad in Cornwall, Ontario. My music teacher's father was a cornet player.
Okay.
So I came up through the public school system.
Okay.
Started studying privately a little bit after that.
What time? How old were you when you started?
I was 12 when I started playing the trumpet, and I started lessons on the late side, I would say. I think I was 15 when I started lessons, so it's a little bit.
Tell us a bit about, or a little bit about the trumpets that you play. Now, not a lot of people might know that there are different types of trumpets, valves, rotary, that sort of thing, different repertoire for each trumpet. Explain a bit about that.
Well, the trumpet, the modern trumpet, as you see here, is a relatively recent invention, and that's because of the valve. So compared to string instruments, winds and brass, their development continued a lot more after the middle of the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution, machining, the ability to make tool and die kind of type stuff meant that valves and pistons were now possible, and they allowed trumpet players and other brass instruments to play different pitches other than the regular harmonic series.
Okay.
So the old trumpets would have had no valves, just a mouthpiece, a tube, and a bell at the other end. So and the other thing that we do, as well as playing instruments of different sort of mechanical styles, is that we play instruments that are pitched in different keys.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, this is a C trumpet, and you can see arbitrarily its length is this tube. But if I show you, this horn is right now pitched in E flat, so you'll see the tubing is a bit less there.
Right, right.
And it's not uncommon in some orchestras, at least in our orchestra in Hamilton we do it, for us to use cornet as well. So you see a little bit of difference there.
Mm-hmm.
And we have other horns, piccolo trumpet and F trumpet and small F trumpet.
Okay, okay. Great. What is your favorite, or where is your favorite place to buy socks?
Well,
You can't be honest answer.
that's a great question. The last place I bought socks was online from Banana Republic.
Oh, okay.
I'm not affiliated with them in any way.
But
But
if Banana Republic, if you want to send socks,
yeah.
we'll take it.
with 2 young children and a busy performing schedule and a teaching schedule, online shopping has like been a boon
Nice,
to our life.
nice. We've talked a bit about different trumpets for different repertoire. Of course, I mean, this is a loaded question when you ask any musician this, but what is some of the repertoire that you favor and why?
Do you mean orchestral repertoire or solo repertoire?
More orchestral.
Orchestral
Let's take the
repertoire.
orchestral first.
We just did Brahms' third in Hamilton,
Mm-hmm.
and the trumpets don't even play the second and third movement.
Right.
They just sit there. And I have to say, I think Brahms is definitely one of my top 3 to 5 composers. I think.
Do you have a favorite of the 4 symphonies?
Uh,
Brahms wrote 4 symphonies.
Yeah, the 4th would be my favorite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just any movement or the last movement?
The last, yeah, well, the last movement is pretty good. The third movement is pretty good. I mean, that symphony is just perfect. It's perfectly lined up. I mean, I just think it's perfect. Although the third symphony is perfect as well.
Yeah.
I mean, Brahms was, he was the ultimate craftsman, I think.
Yeah.
He wrote so well for the orchestra that I'm happy sitting there not playing.
Nice, nice. A little fun trivia question or trivia thing about Brahms symphonies: the different keys that they're written in. So we have C minor, D major, F major, and E minor. What tune? If you can email me the tune of a famous composer about 100 years before that, 130 years before that, that wrote a famous theme with those 4 notes, you'll get a free ticket. All right, so C minor, C, D, F, E, and I'll give you a free ticket. All right. What do you see as your role in the orchestra as principal trumpet, and how do you make that work within the orchestra? A lot of people might not know, but there are principals in each of the sections. There's principal trumpet, and usually there's 2 to 4 trumpets, and they have a position within that trumpet section, within the bigger brass section, and within the whole orchestra. So what's your role, or how do you see your role in that?
All music is chamber music. That's my approach. And so whenever I'm in the orchestra, whether we're playing something like, say, in a Mahler symphony, there are parts of it that literally are chamber music, where there's only 5 or 6 or 8 of you playing at a time, and then other parts where there's 100 of you playing. The same rules apply. Who has the tune, who has the supporting lines, and am I listening and playing with what I'm hearing, or am I ignoring it? And
Mm-hmm.
those sort of basic rules apply no matter what position you're playing. But it's really just thinking as a chamber musician.
And connecting with everyone. Great. Are bananas the new black?
I'm not even sure what that means.
Where do you see classical music going? This is also a bit of a, I wouldn't say a loaded question, but it's something that we as musicians, professional musicians, definitely ask a lot of the time. Where do you see classical music going, and what's your take on its future?
I think that on the artistic side of things, the level of commitment from players and the level of artistic achievement that's going on in most ensembles at least that I'm familiar with in North America, has probably never been higher. The number of listeners out there, that just generic listeners who listen to classical music, has probably never been higher.
Mm-hmm.
But where I think the disconnect happens is in potentially partly in management of these institutions, because especially larger institutions are not able to be, or not aware that they may need to be more flexible and change what they've done in the past, and that is difficult for larger institutions to do. But also, I think part of it is the idea that the managements of these organizations need to be, I feel, invested in the art. And if the board or if the managements of these organizations that are in trouble, if you have institutional alignment between the artistic side and the management side, then you probably will find ways to keep the art
Make it
going.
happen.
I guess, yeah. So I guess to answer your question, I haven't really answered it yet. Where do I see it going? I see it changing, but not diminishing. And maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but I see it as having the potential to increase in its impact on people, as long as the people who are in sort of the management and background side of it are really concerned that the art is what is important.
Right. Mike, you're doing a G2-7 recital coming up in a couple of weeks, October 15th. Tell us a bit about the music that you're performing then.
It's mostly pretty standard trumpet music, recital repertoire. The first thing I'm going to play is the Tartini Concerto. So it's a piccolo trumpet piece, a Baroque piece, originally written for violin. Because of the nature of our instrument, we have to steal repertoire sometimes, but that's legitimate.
And especially in the Baroque.
Yeah.
In the Baroque period.
Yeah, in fact, there's lots of Baroque stuff written, but the Tartini is a nice choice to steal. Following that, I'll play the Halsey Stevens Sonata, which was written in 1956, I believe. And a little pausa. Then after the break, an unaccompanied piece by, it's called Entrada, by Otto Ketting. After that, Enesco legend. Enesco, wrote a ton of great music, a lot of programmatic orchestral music. And luckily, he was friends with, when he was in Paris, he became friends with the trumpet teacher there, Mary Franquin, who taught at the Conservatoire de Paris.
Okay.
And wrote him this piece, which I think is probably one of the best solo pieces we have. It's a beautiful, very short, but very beautiful piece. And then the last piece I'm going to play is the Thorvald Hanson Sonata. Hanson was also a trumpet player, sort of at the turn of the century. His music is, turn of the last century, his music is reminiscent of Schumann, especially the piano part.
And speaking of pianists, you said how it sounds Schumannesque, especially in the piano part. Who will be accompanying you, or who will be playing the piano part?
And my partner for the recital will be Monique de Margerie.
Okay, a wonderful pianist,
yeah.
Who has recently moved to Toronto after many years in Germany and Quebec City, and she's fantastic. Have you ever seen a dog before?
A dog?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I've seen many dogs.
Many dogs?
Is there a subsequent question to this?
No, that's it for that one. Okay, good. Well, thanks, Mike, for your time. I think that's it we've got a lot of information. Fantastic speaking with you about your views, classical music, on trumpet, etc., dogs, especially. Like I said before, Mike will be performing a recital as part of our G2- series, Get to Know Your Group of 27, on Tuesday, October 15th at 7:30 p.m. at the Heliconian Hall in Yorkville. Now, take note, this is a bit different than our usual every second Wednesday of each month. Mike's a bit of a special case in a very good way. But his is on the Tuesday instead. So all the information, details, group of27.com, and we'll be right back. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
back, everyone, to G27TV. Now I'd love to dive into some of the music that we'll be playing on our upcoming November 15th concert, namely Gerald Finzi's Love's Labour's Lost, 3 soliloquies. Now, Finzi was an English composer. He lived in the first half of the 20th century. He was a huge fan of English poetry and literature that he often used for his works. He wrote a lot of songs and wrote a lot of choral works. He also grew apples and saved a number of rare English species or apple variations that might have gone extinct if it were not for him. And then we have his style. It's very characteristic of the first half of the 20th century in England, where there's a certain drama, nobility, nostalgia, melancholic nostalgia. Now, of course, this is not all English music from the first half of the 20th century, but very common to Finzi's work. This particular work was written as incidental music to Shakespeare's Love's Labour's Lost. It was commissioned from the BBC in 1946. They had a radio play of the Shakespeare play. And so we have to think of the setting in which he wrote it, just after the war, a year after the Second World War ended, bombed out London, Finzi's state of mind, his nostalgic, melancholic state of mind. And BBC phones him up and says, hey, we've got 3 weeks, can you do this? Very unusual for Finzi to compose quickly. He usually did it over years. He let works sit and mature and germinate. But this, he took a chance and he did it, and it was very, very successful. So I'm not sure if many of you remember all of your Shakespeare plots or not, or summaries, but Love's Labour's Lost is a comedy in which the King of England and his 3 companions decide to take 3 years of scholarship to improve themselves and just really get to know themselves and literature, art, that sort of thing, without imbibing or taking part in some of the worldly pleasures, including women. Well, wouldn't you know it, just as they take this vow, they get word that the Princess of France is on her way with her companions. And of course, when they arrive, they all meet, they all fall in love, and hilarity ensues. Now, the first movement that we'll be looking at is called the King's Poem. So it's from the King's perspective, and in very good Finzi style. It's melancholic. It's a poem to the Princess of France, but it's not gushing. It's not overly dramatic. We're going to hear snippets of the music in just a little bit here, but it's more subtle and it's quite reserved. It could almost be the musical equivalent of a cup of tea. It's not high energy or dramatic like a cup of coffee that just hits you, but it's a bit more subtle, but still gets the job done. Let's listen to a bit of the beginning. So as you can hear, there's muted strings, which means the string players, violins, violas, cellos, and bass, they put a mute on top of their strings to dampen the sound. That gives it a mellow sound. The winds and brass, when they do come in later on, are flute, clarinet, and horn. 3 of not the most abrasive of instruments. Flute is a bit brighter, but it never gets the melody. The clarinet does get the melody, which is very mellow sounding, and the horn also mellow and has a counter melody. So it's very fitting to what Finzi is trying to do here. And also at the end, there's a bit of anxiousness that sneaks in. We're going to hear it in a second, but you'll hear a D flat major chord, which is a bit odd because usually composers, when they start a piece like this in minor, C minor in this instance, and go to something major, it's usually a brighter or a lighter mood. Not always, overgeneralization, but often. But here, he uses it in a way, the major chord, as a bit of an anxious moment, and then we go into an F minor with an F sharp sort of chord, but all this sort of washes away and closes in that familiar C minor that we had at the beginning. And it's interesting that the marking at the end is morendo al fine, which means dying out to the end. And of course, that's just a musical expression or musical indication to the players, but dying away is quite fitting for the mood of the piece. Now, the second movement is called Longaville's Sonnet. And Longaville is a companion of the king, one of his friends. And this movement is similar to the first in that it's melancholic and longing, but it has an added flavor. It's a bit more forward and sneaky. The beginning musical indication, expression is lusingando, which means flattering or coaxing. So here's Longaville trying to coax or flatter his love. So it's a bit more, it's an added flavor, like I said, than the first more melancholic movement. Now, immediately, you hear the melody in a solo by the viola. And then there's a solo by the bassoon, clarinet, and eventually the violins. But what's odd about that is, when do you hear solos by violas, bassoons, and clarinets? Not very often. Violas, no. Bassoons, hardly ever. Clarinets, sure, sometimes, but not as often as, say, a violin or a piano or oboe. So, first of all, it's a bit odd where we're coming from, and also within the first two measures, we already go through 4 keys, or at least 4 different chords. We've got C major, morphing into A major, D minor, G7 to an A major, within just a solo viola and solo bassoon alone. So we've got something a bit odd going on, but also a bit sneaky. If we're going to play the name game, or the association with British food, I would associate this with a scone or a scone. Just the word by itself is unusual in that if you're in England or in Australia, you're going to say scone, and if you're in the US or Ireland, you say scone. In Canada, I've heard it both ways, scone and scone. So the character, melancholic, yes, but still flattering. It's got a bit of both. And also scones, or scones if you wish, are savory, but then also have a hint of sweetness to them. So here the melody is a bit savory throughout the whole thing, and then right at the end, the last chord is D major. We've got that sweetness that ends the whole movement. The third and final movement is called Domain's Poem, and Domain is another friend of the king, one of his companions. And right from the offset, we notice that Domain is a bit more of an easygoing character, and takes things probably a bit lighter than his other 2 companions and the king. It's more upbeat, it's more easygoing, the tempo is a bit faster, and also the texture. You'll hear the pizzicato in the cellos and the bass. Pizzicato is when the player plucks the strings, and it's a certain texture. It's a lighter texture that comes out. The key itself, B flat major, very warm character, and so you've got this texture of, I don't know, crunchiness a bit on the outside, but inside there's a warmth and gentleness that really makes the character of the whole movement. And the piece ends warmly. The cello and the bass use their bows, and now it's all arco, which means on the string, no pizzicato, and it ends very warmly. Kind of like fish and chips, in that there's a crunchiness on the outside, and there's the warmth and the softness in the middle. It's kind of like comfort food. Well, that pretty much wraps up our first episode of G27 TV, but before we go, we have to answer the trivia question that I asked at the top of the program, which was, who is the only eminent composer in history who's also a successful farmer? Well, the answer is none other than the great Italian opera composer, Giuseppe Verdi, the composer of Traviata, Rigoletto, Aida, many operas, and now there are probably some other composers who are also successful farmers, but I'm pretty sure he is the most successful composer in history to also be a successful farmer, not just like a hobby farmer. So anyway, just a reminder that Mike Fedician and Monique de Margerie are doing a recital October 15th at Heliconian Hall. Tickets, of course, can be found online or at the door. And that's about it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.